Brought to you by Prescient Investment Management. Informed by science. Guided by insight. Prescient Investment Management is an authorized FSP.
Welcome to another episode of Honest Money. I'm smiling today because we've got a repeat guest, and I really enjoyed our last conversation. So, Tam, thanks so much for joining us again. I know you don't like the being on the front of the camera and the microphone, but I appreciate your willingness to chat with us.
Thanks, Warren. It's definitely nerve-wracking being on this side, but I think I've racked up enough experience through all the other podcasts and listening and editing to push through. But I'm excited to be on the show.
So for regular listeners, you might recognize Tam, but for new listeners, Tam works on the Honest Money podcast. So she is our kind of producer extraordinaire, and so she always ends up getting a list of questions she wants to ask, and people ask her questions. So eventually we kind of have to force her in front of the microphone. So Tam, this is your time.
Thanks, Warren. I appreciate it. So obviously working on Honest Money, I've learned a lot and I get more and more questions as we go. And the one topic that I would really like to talk about, and it's also a topic that comes up quite a lot via our WhatsApp line and Twitter, is sort of budgeting tips on how we can actually just survive all of the increases that are happening, costs that we can bring down to potentially bring our savings up. And yeah, just sort of looking for some financial tips from you.
Okay. So budgeting, is always going to be a question of trade-offs. It's always going to be about, I've got X amount of money and it's always going to be not enough, right? That's how life is. And then it's about saying, well, what do I want more? And what's not that necessary to me? So, I think it starts, and it sounds like a kind of a psychological trick first, but actually you've got to look at this and say, I'm not giving something up. I'm choosing to spend my money in one place and I'm choosing not to spend it in another. And it's key to kind of, before you start an exercise like this, just to say, yes, I know we all need to get to the end of the month and survive. That's fine. But let's assume we're not just planning for survival, we're planning for growth, and we're planning to live a better than survival life. Then it's about understanding what's really important to you. What are the things that kind of motivate you? What are the things that in your soul are kind of frightening you so that you need to deal with them? And then set out your priorities that way first. So you've got to make sure that your money aligns with what's important to you. What are your kind of core values? And some of them are very positive. So for someone like me, I work on goals. I need to know that at the start of the year, we're going to go on holiday and I will work hard to save enough money for the holiday. But that's the reward. The other part of it is I need to save for financial freedom. So once I've hit my financial freedom goal, I know for the year in terms of savings, I can start working on my holiday goal, and both are then motivating. Whereas other people might have a deep fear. They might be sitting there saying, I'm so worried about having enough money on retirement, and I'm terrified that I don't want to get to the end of the month or the end of the year and just be drowning in debt, etc. So for someone who's fear driven, it's important to analyze those fears properly, to say, well, what's the core issue? What is the thing that most worries you? And if you deal with that, it tends to kind of free up that person psychologically. They kind of have a weight off their shoulders, and they can make more constructive long-term decisions. But if you're fear driven and you live in fear all the time, you can't think 6 months ahead, forget about 20 years ahead. So you've got to get your brain into kind of long-term thinking, which is first deal with the fear, deal with the thing that's kind of causing the fight or flight response inside your being. So that's the coaching part of the conversation, Tam. But I think practically, once you've kind of figured out your values, what are the things that are important to you, then it's a case of saying, okay, so let's have a look at how I spend today. Don't worry about what you think you should be spending, or this is not a test where you've got to go and impress someone and say, gee, I'm so conservative. This is about you living your life. And so if you can, go and look at the last 3 months of expenses. Actually understand how it is that you have spent your money for the last 3 months. And, understand, well, I'm spending, for example, you buy kind of 5 coffees a day, and they're all lovely coffees, but they're all costing you $30 or $40 a coffee, and that starts to add up. And is that really important to you? For some people, it might be hugely important. For other people, it's kind of a mindless thing. They just get into a habit and they just go and they spend, and then if they actually look at how much they're spending on something like that, they go, well, hang on, that's not important to me. I'm just doing it as a hobby or a habit or to be social. If that's the case, find another way to be social. Find another way to get your coffee, consumption. People who spend a lot of money on takeaway coffees, go and buy a good coffee machine and coffee beans, and you find you'll save lots of money over a year or two. So it's about understanding what you spend, how you spend, and then cutting out or reducing maybe the things that are just irrelevant to you. They're just not important.
I think that's one thing COVID actually taught me, was how much money I was spending on entertainment without being cognizant of it. You've obviously, or not you, but for me, for instance, I've got my entertainment budget for the month. But when entertainment stopped and we couldn't go to restaurants and we couldn't get takeouts or deliveries or quick, checkers, 60 drop offs or whatever the case is, you end up realizing how much money you spend unnecessarily on unimpactful things, in a sense, because you don't get value for your money. After that drink is done, it's done. After that coffee is done, it's done. Where it's reallocating the funds in a way that would make a more lasting impact. And I think I always think about Mapalo when she said on the one podcast, keeping up with the Kamalos. Like, one of her rules was stop trying to keep up with the Kamalos. And when you're talking about the psychology part of it, it's, I think it's also a subliminal thing where, your kids go to these schools and now the kids are asking for what their friends have. And then, you get trapped into the psychological spending without knowing it, because you don't want your kids to feel left out, or you don't want to feel left out, or whatever the case is. And then you're doing it without realizing the value and the understanding behind doing it. So that's very good advice.
And I think maybe also, if you say, well, look, I don't want to stop, seeing my friends or spending time with friends. Maybe it's just it's finding different ways to do that. We live in a place where kind of nature is kind of part of our lives. So finding new ways to spend time with friends. Either going for hikes or walks or picnics or those kinds of things can be kind of really good and really enjoyable and not nearly as expensive as eating out in a restaurant or going for drinks all the time. So it's again, it's saying what's important to me. Okay, it's the time with the friends, not where we spend the time, and then be a drive for change. Most of us spend time with friends that are in similar circumstances to ourselves. So if you're kind of honest with them to say, I'm tired of spending all this money on restaurants and I'd love to save that money. It's amazing how you kind of give them the freedom to say, yeah, me too. Can't we do something different? I think when it comes to food and maybe food consumption at home, that's another big one. So just a little bit of planning, a little bit of kind of bulk cooking makes a huge difference. So it's one of those things where if we live day to day, we don't plan ahead. Number one, it's quite draining and stressful when you're tired from working, long hours to kind of think about what you have to eat every night, making decisions again, and then cooking, and then getting going. And I know from lots of conversations with long-term couples that that's often a source of conflict as well. So solving that problem is saying, let me kind of plot out a week, or even create 3 or 4 weekly schedules that you kind of rotate, and then buy accordingly. So go and buy in bulk, and if you can, some of the things cook them, cook in bulk. And our house is full of kind of Tupperwares. We've got like the 1 portion Tupperware and the 2 portion Tupperware, and we'll spend a weekend, not an entire weekend, but we'll spend some of our weekend cooking big meals and then breaking them up into lunch portions and dinner portions, and then they go in the freezer. And we'll start and kind of go from the top of the freezer down. So we, if it's Monday, we at the top drawer and we just kind of take out a meal. Doesn't matter what it is, we know we'll like it because we cooked it. And so we work our way through from the top to the bottom, and there's no thinking, there's no decision making, and no spending money on takeaways and junk food, and health wise makes a huge impact.
For sure. We were actually chatting over the weekend with friends, and we were saying, that doing research in terms of your groceries is just as important as well, because you really can get stuff cheap at different stores. Yes, it's a pain to have to shop at various places, but if you collectively saving 500 Rand a month by doing that, it's worth it. And there's a lot of price check websites that you can actually utilize at home where you can see, are cleaning products cheaper at Woolies than it is at Checkers or at Pick n Pay? So you can do price checks. And I think if you're consistent enough with it, the savings would be beneficial at the end. But you've just got to put in that little bit of extra effort, just like you're saying with meal planning. It's just that little bit of extra effort that can save a buck here or two.
And you're right about, grocery shopping, can be saving you hundreds of rands. We look at, we started shopping at kind of the local greengrocer rather than any of the big national chains. And the reason we did that was actually health-wise. We wanted stuff that was fresh from the market, at least, at maximum kind of a week old. And my wife kind of said to me the one day, we're saving, but for two people, hundreds of rands a week just by buying our fruit and veg from the greengrocer and not from one of the big national chains. And for me, the health benefit was huge, but the financial benefit's been, really nice as well. So a little bit of shopping around, a little bit of effort makes a huge difference. If we talk about shopping around, I think also, at least once a year, you should be reviewing all of your kind of debit orders. What are you paying? So if you've got a debit order for your account for your car insurance, go and get some quotes. Go and find out that what you're paying today, is it still reasonable? Car companies kind of get into a routine where they kind of just upgrade your premiums every year, and they'll tell you that they reduce the value of your car and whatever it is. But it's amazing that a bit of shopping around will help with that. And the same with your life and disability insurance. Kind of shopping around every 3 years just to make sure that you've got the right premium. Getting quotes again, I think that makes sense. Look at all the subscriptions you've got on your bank account. So we tend to subscribe to kind of streaming services, and for me it's definitely magazine subscriptions. I read a lot on a reader, on a Kindle, and so I'm forever like buying new magazines that I think are really interesting, and then once a year I go, hang on, I haven't read some of these for months now, I'm just going to unsubscribe. And like all of those things that run off your account, just check your cell phone contract. Is it still worth having a contract? Shouldn't you be on pay as you go? Do a little bit of homework there. And your big expenses are obviously the ones you should focus on, but lots of small expenses add up to a big expense. So cover everything.
For sure, Warren. I actually was, at the beginning of this year, I had gone through my debit orders and I was paying for multiple streaming services that I wasn't necessarily using anymore. And I actually stopped those subscriptions and used that money to then pay for an online course to try and upskill myself, so I could potentially get a side hustle to bring in a third revenue of income. And I think for me, I've already noticed the difference. Just having having a little cash injection that helps every now and then, but also upskilling yourself to the sense that whatever you're doing or however you're upskilling is obviously going to help you in your future. And we were discussing it a little bit earlier on before we started the show on, the life expectancy is increasing higher and higher. And if someone had to say to me, millennials are going to live until 120, I am going to freak, because I don't have enough money to keep me alive until 120. So it's little changes that I'm trying to do now in my 30s that will hopefully benefit me back, fast forward. So taking those little expenses into account, and then even just reallocating those little expenses, because if you were spending it anyway, then maybe spending it in a smarter way could help. But I don't know, what is your advice around younger people trying to now have to navigate being alive for 30, 40 years longer than, what we thought, and having to make all these little budgeting changes now to help benefit that?
I mean, I think the maths of this is quite simple. If you spend 10,000 rand, in an average month, just understanding that you need a lot less capital to be financially free than someone who's spending 100,000 rand a month. Just very kind of very simply. So controlling your expenses to live a good and reasonable life, and then allowing your income to grow faster than your expenses over the next kind of decade makes a huge difference in the way that you get yourself set up financially, the way you control your expenses, and then giving yourself the freedom to make important decisions later. I mean, I think kind of people, as they start out their careers, they start to earn, and then they allow their expenses to grow as fast as their earnings. Now, I understand that in year 1, 2, and 3, because the first 2 or 3 years of earning is just never enough. It's just not enough. But by the end of year 3, as your salary rises, you should be flatlining your expenses a little bit. Allow your expenses to increase slightly, but not a lot. And I think that's a huge impact. I think you're doing the one thing which is really important is investing in yourself. Keep yourself kind of learning. Keep your education kind of ongoing. It doesn't have to be millions of degrees and those kinds of things. Short courses. Lots of reading, and keeping your brain kind of flexible to new information is really important. And I think. To me, I think financial freedom is going to be an evolving concept, because I certainly see myself going, okay, so if I hit financial freedom and I stop at age 45, what do I do for the next kind of 60 years or 40 years or whatever? And I mean, I don't want to kind of be a raging alcoholic on the patio looking at the sea, like that's a meaningless last half of my life. So I think getting to the point where you don't have to work, but you choose to work, that's a goal. And I think if someone says to me, you can kind of live a very healthy, very productive life and keep going in that way until age 75 or 80, and then kind of you might have to taper off. Well, that sounds exciting, but then I want to be able to do that. So investing in yourself is key there.
Yes. But I suppose, investing in your health early will also, contribute towards a healthier lifestyle, less ailments, being able to work a little bit longer. But I suppose that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to be able to retire when you want to, but then focus your attention and your time onto a hobby or a passion or something that does keep your soul alive, I guess, for a better sense of the word. And then, Warren, my other question was, how do you know when you're saving enough? So I understand like keeping your expenses low, staying within your means, but how do you, I mean, I think that's just a constant worry for me. There's a lot of calculators available online, but how do you know if you're doing enough? Because if I'm not saving enough now monthly, then I'd rather cut down on my holidays, or I'd rather, cut down on the little luxuries that I do save towards, because it is this just underlying anxiety that I'm just never going to be able to save enough.
So I think understanding that you've got to kind of live within your priorities and your means as well is important. So asking the personal trainer, am I training enough? Probably never. There's never enough, but there is, obviously there's a balance. So let's say if you're saving 33 out of every 100 rand that you're earning, I think that's an incredible saving rate. I think that's that kind of sets you up for financial freedom very quickly. But if you tell people that on day one, people listening to this podcast are immediately rolling their eyes, because there'll be a lot of people that would say, there's just no way I can do that. So let me go the other way, which is you shouldn't be saving less than 15 rand out of 100. So at the very least, every month, 15 out of 100. And if you're struggling to kind of get somewhere, then don't give up. You need to get started. So then maybe you're saving nothing today. Then the answer is save 50 rand this month, just $50. Just see what you can do. Just try that. Put it away and invest it. And then, in 3 or 4 months' time, if that's working, try $100 and see how that goes. And so incrementally start to kind of increase your savings, because I think it's impossible, like with crash diets. Crash diets don't work, because you go from eating terribly to kind of eating incredibly healthily, and that change is so big and it's so sudden, it's not sustainable. So it's the same with money. We've got to make our money habits change incrementally over time. And if you're struggling and you already cut everything down and you're kind of living a terrible life, then the next raise you get, save that. And maybe you can't cut anymore. So I think there are ways that you can do it to kind of suit yourself. But the people that are earning well, that know that they're kind of got scope to cut things and cut expenses, I think the goal is 33 out of 100 rand. If you can save that, then by all means spend the rest on your life, entertainment, holidays, education, all of those things, and watch how your financial picture changes over time.
That's very, very good advice. I think you get quite put off knowing that you have to save 30% of your salary or 15% of your salary or even 10%, because it's so daunting. How am I going to be able to afford? I'm already living month to month, and now I have to put this massive chunk of change aside, where I think doing it in smaller steps becomes more manageable over time, and I think then you start becoming a little bit more savvy with how you save, where you cut costs, how you upskill, how you get a freelance job on the side or whatever the case is, because then your brain is sort of now directing your goals towards something instead of just panicking and out of fear, which ties back to what you said in the beginning of the podcast. Very, very interesting advice. Thank you, Warren. This is great. This is a nice metric to have to follow on through.
Well, Tam, I think we're blown through our time. So thank you so much for joining and for the conversation. Let's hope that you and your friends kind of get some value and we have this follow-up conversation in the months ahead.
For sure, definitely. Warren, thank you so much. It was lovely being back on the show. I am definitely happy behind the screen as well. So it was great. Thank you, Warren.
Brought to you by Prescient Investment Management. Informed by science. Guided by insight. Prescient Investment Management is an authorized FSP.